This is one of the parts that is very often overlooked by people who are not used to writing grant applications. And it's that you have to describe a really big problem and a really strong narrative for the evaluators to understand what exactly the project is about. So for example, let's say you have a technology that is going to reduce the carbon emissions of cement. Then yes, you could start the whole problem talking about the cement industry. But my recommendation is always to have a really grand narrative, that you start out talking about climate change. You talk about climate change is projected to reach 500 million in economic damages over the next 5 years. So you start with the biggest problem you can think of in your particular industry. If you have something like a medical technology, and if you have, for example, a medication that is going to address one particular type of cancer and one particular type of organ, then maybe you want to start really big as well. Maybe you say that healthcare costs are on the rise. This is what you start out with. Healthcare costs are going to be 20% of the entire GDP of every country, or something like that, of Western countries. You start really, really big. You try to find the biggest part of your narrative. Even though you're not addressing healthcare costs of every single country, because you're only addressing one particular kind of cancer, and this is something you're even still developing, you still go to the biggest narrative you can think of. And then you slowly lead to your solution. So for example, healthcare costs are amounting to so and so much percent of the GDP in so and so many countries, accounting for 1 trillion euro per year, or something like that. And then you say chronic diseases are a major driver, and then you talk about this a little bit and you quantify as much as possible. For example, a quantification can be are affecting 1 in 3 people, for example, or affecting 90% of the people above 65 or something, or leading to healthcare costs of so and so much per person or so and so much per country. So you always try to quantify, but you trickle it down from the big problem, which is the healthcare cost in the world. And then you talk about chronic diseases, and then you talk about cancers, and then you talk about your particular cancer. You're slowly leading it down. This is a big narrative. And what you want to do is you want to add all of these quantified problems, all of these global pain points. Climate change is leading to 50 billion in economic damages. 250 countries have signed the Paris Agreement, and they're trying to keep global warming below 1.5%. But currently emissions are still rising. This has dramatically increased the need for renewable energy systems, but they're currently too expensive. Especially energy storage is associated with high cost. And you can already see I'm leading you to a cheaper version of energy storage. You start out with the big problem of climate change, and then you highlight a lot of commitments, different countries signing the Paris Agreement, always good quantifiers. And then you talk about energy storage. And then you have to decide what your angle is. Are you going to say that you have a replacement for lithium-ion batteries? For example, you have some solid-state battery that is far superior. Or maybe you want to talk about different versions of energy storage, maybe thermal energy storage, or maybe you have a little more long-term energy storage, maybe something like redox flow batteries. The narrative is designed to start really big and to lead to your particular problem. So if you read that narrative, you're going to think, oh wow, this is exactly the solution we need. And there are different ways to go. So for example, if your technology is an improved lithium-ion battery, the narrative would be different than, for example, if you have a sodium battery, or if you have a solid-state battery, or redox flow battery. If you have a redox flow battery, you'll probably talk about how you don't need all these raw materials. You don't need nickel, you don't need cobalt, you don't need lithium. There's so many value chain problems with these materials. So if you have a completely different technology, you're going to highlight these problems. But if you have a different lithium-ion battery, you maybe don't want to open that can of worms and saying that nickel and cobalt are associated with so many problems, because you also need them. So you're not going to mention that. You're going to talk about a different angle. So for example, you're going to say that lithium-ion batteries are great, but here's a problem with the efficiency. Here's a problem with the manufacturing. Here's a problem with the energy needs during the manufacturing. So you decide which problem you want to highlight. And there's always a problem. Even if you have a software technology that is addressing something that is not a climate area or it's not a health area. Let's say you're some type of energy brokerage that is going to be used for energy trading markets. Then maybe the big narrative you want to choose is something like, there's some big problems if the energy trading markets are inefficient. There's some price spikes. They're going to harm governments. They're going to harm the consumer. Maybe you can cite a number of damages. Maybe there's so and so much money that was lost because of inefficient energy trades. So you decide what the big problem is. But you have to make sure that when you start from the big problem and you go to the smaller problem, at the end, you're going to land at your solution. So the narrative is basically creating a small hole where your solution is perfectly going to fit in. So the narrative is going to be the perfect form to match your solution in the end. This is what many companies are missing, because you have to start really, really big.